Hi everyone, I'm Jenny, and today I'll be leading the workshop for web application security. This workshop is going to be a combination of lecture and application. So we're going to go over all the information conceptually in the beginning. And in the second half, we're actually going to go through part of a try-hack-me room to demonstrate some of the techniques that we are going to learn about. So before we begin, just make sure that you have try-hack-me set up. So if you don't, follow this link and basically just create an account and download OpenVPN so that when we go through the try-hack-me room, you'll be all good to go. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get started. So what is web application security? Web application security is a branch of information security that deals with the security of websites, web applications, and web services. This protects websites against threats that exploit vulnerabilities in the code and also protects data and computer resources. So think about sites that you commonly use, like maybe Facebook or Google or Amazon. Web application security is really important for these sites because if there isn't anything that prevents hackers from getting into your information, then they'll be able to get access to where you live, your phone number, your credit card number, and obviously that's definitely a problem. So web app security helps protect your information. Web applications are actually high priority targets. And this is because the complexity of source code increases the likelihood of vulnerabilities. There's often a large amount of sensitive data that can be retrieved. Like think about every time you ask websites to store your password or keep you logged in. And attacks can be easily automated. So hackers can create a script and easily brute force their way into the website if there isn't anything that prevents them from getting in. And this would just allow them to gain access to your account, which we obviously don't want. Some common web app security vulnerabilities are cross-site scripting, which is basically an XSS injection, a SQL injection, and denial of service attacks. There's also a lot more vulnerabilities out there, and we're going to talk about some of these in later slides. So how can we test for weaknesses? Of course, like there's a lot of specific ways that you can do this. There's specific techniques and specific tools that you can use. But the main thing is basically understanding how the application works, what technologies are being used, and what version. This is really important because some technologies with some versions have vulnerabilities that haven't been fixed yet. So if the hacker does their research and realizes that the specific version has something that they can take advantage of, then they can easily compromise the system. So how do we test for security? The first thing we need to do is establish a methodology. There's different ways you can go about this. The first method is to just go through every page and test all the functionality to see what can be exploited. So you would basically have to go through all the pages of the website and just try different techniques for different areas that seem vulnerable to you. The second way to do this is break testing into different stages, such as authorization, which is basically when you understand the authorization process, which can allow you to traverse directories or escalate privileges. There's authentication, which is when you can basically figure out how authentication works and how you can circumvent it, like brute force testing. There's injection, which is basically when user supplied data is invalidated by the server. There's client-side controls, which is basically when the process that enforces user set permission is implemented at the user end, which allows the perpetrator to disable access control. And there's also application logic, which is often logic flaws in the code that allows the attacker to circumvent things. Your methodologies basically vary on the type of website you're testing. So it's important to do your research and figure out how the website works so you can figure out what kind of methodology you want to do. You also don't have to go through all these stages. If you find that there's a stage that you want to add or a stage that you can remove, that's totally fine. everything that you do is basically specific to whatever you're testing, whatever website you're testing. So what are the stages of testing? Well, one stage that you can do is authentication, and there's different ways to do this. One way to test for authentication is brute forcing. And this is when you systematically try out every combination of letters, numbers, and symbols. And of course, you can't really do this by yourself because there's an infinite amount of passwords that you can do. So what people often do is that they basically write a script that will do it for them so they don't have to manually put in every single thing. So for example, if you wanted to brute force, you could try like A, and then AB, and then ABC, and then ABCD, and so on until you finally reach the password. And oftentimes, website will account for this vulnerability by limiting the number of times you can try a password. And I'm sure you guys experienced this when you forget your password, but then you've already guessed over 5 times. You can't keep on guessing. So that's one way websites prevent you from doing this. Another way to test for authentication is the credentials. So a lot of times people can be lazy or just not creative and they can't think of a good password. So some weak passwords are password, QWERTY, 123456, or whatever the username is. So sometimes attackers can just guess weak passwords and maybe they'll stumble upon your password. Another way to test for authentication is session management. So sessions contain the state of the application, so it can be manipulated and sent back to the server. So these are 3 ways that you can test for authentication. Another stage of testing that you can do is testing for XSS injection. This is a vulnerability that allows perpetrators to inject malicious client-side scripts into websites. And by doing this, attackers can steal session information, impersonate the user, or redirect users to other pages. So one example of an XSS attack is a persistent or non-reflected attack, which is basically when the XSS payload is stored in the database. And this is executed when the server passes data from the database to the web page. So another type is a non-persistent attack or a reflected one, and this is when the XSS payload is crafted using a malicious link and it's not stored. So an XSS attack is actually kind of injection. The attacker can inject basically malicious JavaScript into the website, and because the information isn't validated, the website will just execute it. So one way to test for XSS is actually injecting JavaScript into an input bar. So like a search page or a login page. And in this case, if there is that XSS vulnerability, there will be a pop-up box in the website that will alert XSS or whatever you put in the quote. Some other kinds of injections are SQL injections and command injections. So for these injections, it's also not validated by the server. So in the same way with XSS, it can really take advantage of the web application. So in a SQL injection, the attacker provides malicious data that's processed by SQL statements on the server. When the attacker does this, they can read sensitive data from the database. They can modify the database data and execute administration operations on the database. Attackers can also spoof identity, tamper with data, and become administrators of the database servers. And these types of injections are really common with PHP and ASP applications. So this is also like another example of why knowing your application is really important. Because if you find out that the application you're testing is PHP or ASP, then you know that you should probably test for a SQL injection just because they often have this vulnerability. Another type of injection is a command injection. And this is when the attacker provides malicious data that's processed as system commands. And this is possible when the application passes unsafe user-supplied data, such as forms, cookies, and HTTP headers to system shell, and this will typically fully compromise the application and its data. So one example of a SQL injection that you can do is this input to the application that's under the example. And we'll actually explain how this works when we go through the Try Hack Me room, and it's actually like pretty interesting how it works. Some other vulnerabilities are a logic flaw. So this is when an application might not work as expected due to mistakes in the code. And so basically attackers can circumvent certain things, and we'll actually see this in the Try Hack Me room. Another thing is a directory traversal, which is when attackers can manipulate variables that reference files to access files and directories stored outside the web root folder. And another one is forceful browsing, which is when attackers can access restricted content using brute force techniques to find unlinked content in the domain directory. So we've gone over quite a few things. We've talked about methodologies and different stages of testing like authentication, injections like XSS, command, and SQL. And we've also talked about other vulnerabilities that exist that you may want to test. So now that we've talked about all these concepts, let's actually see them being put into action through a Try Hack Me room. So here's a link to the Try Hack Me room that we're going to do. It's Web App Security 101. And here are the tasks that we're actually going to do in the Try Hack Me room. So the first task that we're going to do is walking through the application. So we're basically just going to look through the website, see how it works and what technologies they use. The next thing we're going to do is authentication. So we're actually going to be guessing usernames and passwords to gain access to accounts that we shouldn't have access to. The next thing we're going to do after that is cross-site scripting. So we're actually going to be injecting JavaScript into different parts of the website to see which parts have the vulnerability. After that, we're going to do a SQL injection and try to gain access to usernames as well as like another way to log in as someone. And the last thing we're going to do is a logic flaw. So we're going to take advantage of a logical flaw in the application. Great. So let's get started and do a Try Hack Me room. So this is the room that we're going to do, Web App Security 101. And we're going to basically see how we can test an application. The first thing we're going to do is deploy the room. And it actually takes a while for the IP address to show up. Okay, great. So our IP address has appeared, so I'm going to copy paste that and put it into my browser. And I have a page that says this site can't be reached. So if you get this page, don't freak out. Sometimes it just takes more time for it to load. So maybe just wait another 2 or 3 minutes, and if it still doesn't load, then you can try redeploying the room. Great, so our website finally loaded and we can get started. So as I said before, the first thing that we're going to do is walk through the application. So specifically, we want to find out what technologies this website uses. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but the way we're going to do this today is actually by using inspect element. So we're going to right-click and click on inspect. After that, we're going to click on network. I'm going to refresh the page to get requests, and I'm just going to click on a random one. And I'm going to look at the HTTP response headers. And this tells us a lot of things. The first thing it tells us is what version of Apache that it's using. And the other thing is that it's telling us that it uses PHP version 5.5.9. And finding out this information is really important because sometimes specific versions have vulnerabilities that haven't been fixed. So you can actually just do some research and see if there's anything that you can take advantage of. Another thing that's really important is that by doing this, we've seen that this application is a PHP application. And when we talked about SQL injections, we noted that PHP and ASP applications were often vulnerable to SQL injections. So now that we have this information, we know that SQL injection should be something that we test today. Okay, great. We're also going to just look through the application and see if there's anything interesting. Okay, so looking through the application, I can see that there's a lot of places for user input, like the search bar, logging in, and the guest book. So since there's a lot of user input, we also might want to try some injections. So in addition to the SQL injection, we also might want to try XSS scripting. Okay, let's just keep on looking through. We can create accounts. We can check out a sample user. And we can see what is going on today, tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. There's actually a coupon, which seems kind of interesting. Okay, so as I was looking through the sample user page, I saw something that I thought was pretty interesting. So in the URL, it says user ID equals 1. And this makes me wonder if I can change the URL to find different users of user ID. So what if I just want to change it to 2? Okay, so it's a user called Bob, and I can see his pictures. Let's try user ID equals 3. Let's try 4. Okay, let's try 5. Let's try 6. Let's try 7. Okay, so it seems like I can see what users there are just by changing the user ID. So this way I can actually gain access to what users use this website. So what I'm doing right now is something called parameter manipulation. So in this case, I'm basically just changing the URL query string, and this will basically let me gain access to pages that I shouldn't have access to. And by doing parameter manipulation, I now know what users use this website. Like there's Bob, there's like scanner 1 through 4, and if I keep on changing this user ID and the URL, I can easily find all the users that use this website. Okay, so that was an example of parameter manipulation. And I was able to do this just by looking through the website and just seeing if there's anything interesting. Okay, cool. So the next thing that I'm going to do is try to log in as a user. And this is going to be, I guess, part of the authentication step, since I'm basically trying to circumvent their login process. So by doing parameter manipulation and kind of gaining access to different users there are, I now know what usernames there are. So I know there's Bob, there's scanner 1, scanner 2, scanner 3, and so on. So I know the usernames, which is, I guess, one part of the process. But I also need their password. Unfortunately, I can't really read their minds and just kind of go into their brain and figure out what their password is. So I'm actually just going to try to guess their password. I'm hoping that one of these users was lazy when they created their account and have a password that I can easily guess. So I know that Bob is a user, so I'm going to try to log in as Bob. Okay, so I'm going to say the username is Bob. Okay, so some weak passwords that people often use are 123456, QWERTY, password, and whatever the username is. So I'm just going to try some of these and see if we can get into his account. So I'm going to try 123456. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try password. Okay, that didn't work either. I'm going to try his username, which is Bob. So Bob for username and password. Okay, that actually let me get into Bob's account. So this is an example of testing authentication. Sometimes you may have to brute force if people have strong passwords, but if they have weak passwords, you can just do weak credentials and just try to guess their password. Okay, so we've successfully gotten into a user's account. Let's try to get into the admin account. So I'm going to log out. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's actually a link to admin. And we can see that it is a different login. Okay, so some common admin usernames are admin, administration, and so on. So we're just going to try to log in as an admin. Okay, and going by the same practice before, we're just going to guess the password. So I'm going to guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to guess password. And I'm going to guess admin since it's the same as the username. And that actually let us get in. Okay, so now that I'm an admin, I can create a new user and so on. But I think that's all we're going to do for testing for authentication. So the next thing that we're going to do after authentication is actually test for injection. So earlier when we walked through the website, we actually saw that there were a lot of places for user input. So the next thing we're going to do is test for XSS scripting. And we're basically just going to inject some JavaScript into the website and see if there's that vulnerability. So I can see that there is a search bar, so we're just going to test for XSS there. So I'm going to enter some JavaScript. And if there is a vulnerability, basically a pop-up on the website will appear that says hello. And if there is this vulnerability, this is because the server doesn't validate whatever you're putting in. So it's basically just going to run the script because there's no validation. Okay, so we can see that there was a pop-up that showed up, which means that there is that vulnerability for XSS injection. And this is really important because what we're putting in right now isn't really malicious. It's just making a pop-up that says hello. But if an actual attacker was able to inject JavaScript, they could gain access to a lot of things that you don't want them to access. Okay, we're going to test for XSS here as well. So I'm just going to type, my name is Jenny, and in my comments, I'm going to inject a script that will make a pop-up box that says, the web application security is cool. Okay, so that also created a pop-up. So we also know that the comment box of the guest book also has the XSS scripting vulnerability. Great, so that was one kind of injection that we tested. The next kind of injection that we're going to test is a SQL injection. And the reason why we're testing this is because we know it's a PHP application. So we definitely should try doing a SQL injection just because they're often vulnerable to that type of injection. Okay. So we're actually going to test this injection by registering for an account. And we're going to put in this text. And we're going to copy paste it into all the boxes. And this text might seem really familiar from our PowerPoint, and in a minute we're just going to see how it works. So I'm going to create an account using this. And the reason why we did this is because this website has this functionality that's called Who's Got a Similar Name to You. So it's going to look at your username and pull up all the users that have really similar usernames to you. So the reason why we put this specific text in is because it takes advantage of the SQL statement. this will basically add an operator to the SQL statement, and it's going to add 1 equals 1. And we know that 1 equals 1 is always true. And in a SQL statement for the OR operator, it only needs to fulfill one of the conditions for it to actually show up in the results table. So when the website when you ask the website who has a similar name to you, it's going to run a query in their database of all the usernames. And because 1 equals 1, it's going to pull up every single username, because every single username is supposedly going to match up, because 1 equals 1 is always true. So in this way, you can actually gain access to all the usernames in the website. So you don't even have to do the parameter manipulation that we did before. You can just do the SQL injection and gain access to all the users without changing any URLs. So we're going to actually click on the tab that says who's got a similar name to you, just to see if it worked or not. Okay, and it's that we got all the users. And if you remember from before when we did the parameter manipulation, you'll remember that we did see the sample user, Bob, Skinner 1, 2, 3, and so on. So this is another way to get all the users. Great. So this is one way to use a SQL injection. Another way to use a SQL injection is actually if you want to log in as someone. So I'm going to log out. And before, when we tried to log in as someone, we had to basically assume that the user had a weak password. But what if they don't have a weak password and you don't know how to write a script to brute force? Well, you can use a SQL injection, and we're going to try to do that. So let's just try to log in as Bob again. But this time, what if he has some super strong password that's like 20 characters long with multiple capitalizations and symbols, and we simply can't guess that. So we're going to use the SQL injection to try to log in as Bob. So we're going to type in something that's really similar to before. And we're going to leave the password blank because we don't know the password. And it let me log in as Bob. And the reason why this worked was because we used that OR operator again, where 1 equals 1. So no matter what we put, the credentials that we put in would match up with whatever's in the database because 1 equals 1. So this is another way to log in as someone if your initial either brute forcing or re-credentials doesn't work. Okay, great. So we've done authentication, we've tested for XSS injection and SQL injection. So the last thing that we're going to do is actually take advantage of a logic flaw. So in this website, you can look at recent pictures, and you can actually buy pictures. So like this one is 10 Tradebox. This one is like 30 Tradebox. So we're actually going to try to get a picture for free. Let's see. So this dog looks pretty cute, so I'm going to try to get this picture for free. So I can see it's 15 Tradebox, but I don't want to spend any Tradebox. So I'm going to add this to my cart and see what I can do. I can see that in the cart, there is a place for a coupon code. And if you remember before when we were walking through the application, there is actually a coupon code. So I'm going to find that coupon code again and enter it in. Okay, so I'm going to click on what is going on today. I'm going to look at tomorrow until I get to the coupon code. So I can see that it's for 10% off. Okay, 10% off. It's not free, but I guess it's better than nothing. I'm going to submit it. Okay, so it's 10% off. And I wonder if they have any logic that prevents you from putting multiple coupons. So I'm just going to test that out. And oops. Okay, so I'm just gonna keep on adding coupons and see how low I can get it. Okay, I'm gonna say that's enough, and I'm just gonna see how much it costs now. I'm going to continue to confirmation. Okay, I see that I've gotten to 5 Tradebox, which isn't free, but honestly, that's like pretty good. It's a pretty good amount off. Okay, I can see that there's a high quality link, and I'm going to click on the picture and see where it takes me. So it seems like I'm able to access this picture in a high quality format, and I'm just going to see if I can save it. Okay, so it seems like it actually will let me save the picture. So I think this is the real logic flaw. I wasn't able to get it down to 0 Tradebox using coupon, but it's letting me access this high quality link of a picture and letting me save it. So I can easily just just take this picture without buying it just because they provided me that link. So this is an example of a logic flaw. Users don't have to buy anything, they can just follow the link to the picture. Great, so we've done part of the Try Hack Me room. If you're really interested in web app security, I would definitely recommend going through the rest of this room as well as trying out other types of rooms because you can really learn a lot by applying all the concepts that we learned today. Additionally, if you want to learn more about web app security, here are some links that I personally found really helpful. The first two explain what web app security is in greater detail. The third link is a list of common usernames that you could use if you're testing for authentication. And the last link is different types of attacks. So it'll go into some of the attacks that I talked about in greater detail. Okay, so thank you guys so much for joining me for this workshop today. I hope that it was interesting. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And I hope you have a really great hackathon.